Sean Spicer made an unusual appearance in the briefing room yesterday, and the new White House press secretary unloaded on the press.
One was a particularly egregious example in which a reporter falsely tweeted out that the bust of Martin Luther King Jr. had been removed from the Oval Office. After it was pointed out that this was just plain wrong, the reporter casually reported and tweeted out and tried to claim that a Secret Service agent must have just been standing in front of it. This was irresponsible and reckless.
Joining us now to analyze this battle and the coverage of the inauguration, Aaron McPike, a political commentator and former reporter for Real Clear Politics. Molly Hemingway, senior editor at The Federalist. And Joe Trippi, Democratic strategist and a Fox News contributor. That was an extraordinary scolding by Sean Spicer of the media, and he took no questions. What message was he and the new president trying to send?
Well, listen, first of all, I'm hearing that some people are calling it a press conference. It is not a press conference if you don't take questions. It was a statement. And the fact that he came out there and gave a statement and scolded the press on the very first day was really troubling, and I think it was troubling for every reporter in there. And we're seeing so many reporters come out and say that there was a chilling moment, that it was really bad for them.
Well, I think any administration has the right to push back. Question, as a matter of strategy, does it make sense for President Trump and Sean Spicer to mount an offensive about the size of the inaugural crowd versus President Obama's crowd? Is that really what this is about?
Well, it is an interesting choice for them to make because it seems like such an unimportant thing to litigate crowd size. At the same time, it is absolutely true that the media were utterly obsessed about making the inauguration seem small, trying to denigrate everything that happened on Inauguration Day. And I think that what the administration is doing is coming out and saying, we're not going to take this lying down. This has been, the media are years into a war on Donald Trump. They're not even hiding it. And the administration is letting them know they're not going to just take it like Republicans normally do.
Some people around Trump believes this deflects attention from the women's marches, which got a lot of coverage. We'll get into that later in the program, because this is what we're talking about this morning. This is the lead of every Sunday show. Does this battle overshadow what Trump is trying to accomplish? Because without this fight, we'd be talking about executive orders and what's he going to do the first week in office and visiting the CIA.
I think it overshadows probably the most important thing he said in his inaugural speech, which was the establishment let you down. It protected itself. It didn't protect you. It was a radical speech. That reporting is correct because it was, and that's what we should be debating. I think that was a very important thing for him to have said and what it means. Instead, we're now litigating crowd size, which the press may have raised that. But when you do go back, but when you go back into the briefing room and you're going to take the press on that, it would be nice if the facts were on your side. Like when you say the white plastic has never been used before, and it wasn't, and all the other things.
Except you're absolutely right about the speech being a declaration of war against the established order. A major part of the established order are the media.
Exactly.
And that is why we're seeing this war being brought to the media immediately.
Don't take the war to, if you're going to take the war to the media, which is great, do it with facts on your side. Right. Not with the magnetometer stopped the crowd from getting in and the Secret Service says that didn't happen. There were no magnetometers.
The crowd sizes on Friday were a detail, and reporters were tweeting pictures out, and there were some side stories, but that wasn't the main coverage. But then Trump and Spicer made it the main coverage the following day. Yes. And look, it's very clear that President Trump wanted the very same coverage that Barack Obama got in 2009. But look, this is a different story. Now Donald Trump is the president, too, so he has the chance to create his own story.
This is exactly what Donald Trump did with great success throughout the campaign when he would pick these fights, often with the media, sometimes with opponents, and he would dominate the coverage, and this is what we're now discussing. At the same time, there have been media missteps. In Time Magazine's Zeke Miller felt the need to put in a pool report that the Martin Luther King bust had been taken out of the Oval Office. That was not true. That gave Sean Spicer something to push back on. Now, the reporter apologized. Spicer accepted it, but of course made an issue of it. Watching the Sunday shows, I'm thinking there's a larger battle here. So Reince Priebus was on with Chris Wallace on Fox News Sunday, said there's an obsession by the media to delegitimize this president. That's what they see the crowd size kerfuffle as being a proxy for. And Kellyanne Conway, the new White House counselor, really got into it with Chuck Todd on Meet the Press. Here's just a bit of that.
I want to go back to a question that you continue to deflect. Why was it necessary to send out the press secretary on his first day in office to utter a provable falsehood that now calls into question everything the press secretary will say from here on out. It will for many Americans.
No, it doesn't. You want them to hear that. You want them to hear that I'm not answering your questions, which I'm doing. You want them to hear that they can't trust our press secretary. I think that is a very dangerous statement to me. Respectfully, your job is not to call things ridiculous that are said by our press secretary and our president. That's not your job.
Molly.
So this is a great example of this, of how the media are handling or responding to this poorly. The media took it lying down for 8 years when the press secretary or other people in the Obama administration explicitly said false things about Benghazi, lied about the extent of the IRS targeting of conservatives, lied about cash transfers to Iran, bragged about making an echo chamber to pass the Iran deal, and you had a president himself saying repeatedly, if you like your health care plan, you can keep it, a gazillion times, while millions of people lost their health care plan. A media that doesn't push back against that type of falsehood for 8 years and then acts all upset about Sean Spicer talking about numbers is not going to be taken seriously at all.
So says the crowd size thing is provably false. The New York Times uses similar language. Is it, let's answer Kellyanne Conway's question, is it the job of an anchor or journalist, a correspondent, to challenge the administration when he or she believes there's something false? Or are we just getting caught up in what most Americans are going to see as a bunch of bull?
I don't think the Americans care about what the crowd size.
I don't either.
Which is why, sending Sean Spicer in to actually sort of pour gasoline on the charges is, I think, a mistake. And I think the press, however, once he does that, and then literally, I think there was only one thing he said that was true, and I can't remember what it was, because everything else is provably false about the magnetometers and everything he made. The press is going, you're declaring war, and then you're saying, here are the facts, and the press isn't going to come back and go wrong, 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 true. And I think that's basically where it is right now.
And then the press fought back, right? The New York Times did a huge story based on crowd scientists from the protests yesterday to inauguration on Friday.
Yeah, but we were litigating this like it's weapons of mass destruction. It just seems to me that there's a lot of firepower aimed on this. Let me turn to the coverage of the speech. You saw some of those reviews, radical, dark, troubling. Some pundits, particularly on the right, thought it was a great populist speech. Many on the left were really trashing it. What do you make of the divide there?
I don't think it can be broken down in how people viewed it between just left and right. I mean, David Frum, who's actually a conservative writer for The Atlantic,
and former Bush aide,
said it was the worst inaugural address in history. That was probably going a little too far.
George Will hated it as well. But the New York Times, Molly, called the speech an angry Jeremiah. The Politico's headline was, Trump paints a dark America only he can save. So there was, I mean, everybody's entitled to an opinion, but this was pretty much panned.
Well, and I think too many people moved immediately to how the speech is going to play instead of just reporting on what it said. But even on the issue of how something plays, this is a really important reason why people need more diversity in newsrooms. That speech played completely differently to average Americans who voted for Donald Trump than it does to David Frum, who has hated Donald Trump for years. And you need to have some perspective from people who heard, in fact, a very inspiring call to unity and were very excited again about his call to destroy Washington, D.C.'s established order. That's what they voted for, and he said, I'm really going to do it, and that's exciting.
That includes both parties. Okay, Chris Matthews goes on MSNBC and says the speech was Hitlerian, or it had Hitlerian overtones, because of the use of the phrase America First. Now, this came up in the campaign. Donald Trump has a different meaning. He's trying to use America First, popularize it, from the pre-World War II movement that did have anti-Semitic overtones to try to keep this country out of the Second World War. Why go there and bring up something like Hitler?
Well, I think, one, I wouldn't agree with that language, but secondly, I think Molly's right, that what's going on here, and that's why I pointed to that line in the speech about the establishment. The press and the media is reacting to this thing as establishment, all alarmed about what the president's saying. I think that's what you're seeing. I think one of the things that the media has to do a better job of is we have opinion people and we have news people. And the opinion people tend to come out of the establishment right now, and I think are reacting to him in a much different way than a lot of reporters. I mean, journalists who should just be reporting the news and not stating opinions, and there's confusion about
themselves
that.
A very big target for this new president, and it worked for him in the campaign, and perhaps we haven't learned some of those lessons. Email us at mediabuzz@foxnews.com with your thoughts on the coverage. When we come back, President Trump visited the CIA yesterday and said the media were creating a fictitious feud. We've got Brett Baer on deck and Corey Lewandowski coming up. President Trump visited the CIA yesterday on his first full day in office, and it wasn't long before he took aim at his favorite target.
As you know, I have a running war with the media. They are among the most dishonest human beings on earth. Right? And they sort of made it sound like I had a feud with the intelligence community. And I just want to let you know, the reason you're number one stop, it is exactly the opposite.
Molly Hemingway, did the media conjure up some fictitious feud between Donald Trump and leaders of the intelligence community?
It was not fictitious, particularly not with the leaders of the intelligence community. Donald Trump tweeted and talked about his dislike of what was happening in terms of intel chiefs leaking information against him to delegitimize him.
And even suggesting, if I can interrupt you for half a second, that Obama's last CIA chief, John Brennan, was this the leaker of fake news?
So this is
the unsubstantiated dossier with the Russian allegations and so on.
Right. What was happening was there was a war between the intel chiefs and Donald Trump, and they were both engaged in this war, the intel chiefs through leaking, Donald Trump by talking against what they were doing. The media did portray a lot of this as if he was at war with the intelligence community or intelligence agencies writ large, when in fact there are a lot of rank and file intel officers who were extremely displeased with the politicized nature of this leak campaign that was very unprofessional by these chiefs, people like Brennan and Clapper.
Right. So the new president goes to the CIA to show its importance to him in his first official visit. But once again, it's about the media, Joe.
Well, going there was good, and telling him that he backed him up was good, and I think, but I do think it was news when he started talking about how many times he was on Time magazine's cover and had the crowd size, and that again takes away from the main message of what he was trying to do, I think.
Look, this is not a teleprompter president. I don't think it's fine for him to bring up some of this other stuff. He's still fighting the election and basking in the glow of his victory. That's fine. But again, instead of the headline being, Trump shows support for CIA, it was Trump blames media for intelligence feud, which he says that we have kind of exacerbated or cooked up.
And he said he was at war with the media at the CIA on his first full day in office. I mean, that line alone was a problem. And
why? Maybe he is at war. Maybe his people want him to be at war with the press that they don't trust.
Look, I'm sure they do. Is it the right message for day one? I don't know. I mean, we've got to cover this in an entirely new way. I think it makes it harder for a lot of the press to have an open mind. I do. I have an open mind about covering President Trump, but I do think he made it harder for the entire press to do it. Now, I think we're not getting into some of the more important lines in his inaugural address because this is being eaten up. I think one of the most important lines in that address was when he said, we are going to eradicate radical Islamic terrorism from the face of the earth. That was a huge statement and will be very difficult for him to do. We'll be holding him to account on that for the next 4 years.
Molly,
but we're not talking about that today.
Molly, you said during the break that all of this, Trump versus the media, crowd size, MLK bus, all of that, it burns very brightly here in Washington, but that his comments, his speech, you believe it heard differently out in what I'll call the heartland.
Well, just taking this media war, we talked earlier about proxy wars. The media are engaged in a proxy war too. Their attacks on Trump are viewed by a lot of people as attacks on them. And the media have no trust, no objectivity, no credibility. They are not in a position to fight this war with Donald Trump because they don't have good footing. They are reviled, and people understand that the media seem to revile them. So when Donald Trump's talking about going to war against the media, a lot of people see that as finally someone championing them. They are sick of the media attacking them and their beliefs and the things they love and care about.
You'll have to respond later in the program because Molly took the last word. We'll see you later, panel. Up next, Donald Trump and Barack Obama have starkly different views of the media. We'll take a look at that. And later, Donald Trump's first campaign manager, Corey, will be here. We saw two strikingly different views of the media as the presidential handoff took place. At President Obama's last news conference, he paid tribute to the notion of a free press.
You're not supposed to be sycophants. You're supposed to be skeptics. You're supposed to ask me tough questions. You're not supposed to be complimentary, but you're supposed to cast a critical eye on folks who hold enormous power.
And in an interview with Fox and Friends, President Trump offered a darker view of the media as the reason behind his Twitter taunts.
What about Twitter? Are you going to continue to tweet?
Yeah, look, I don't like tweeting. I have other things I could be doing. But I get very dishonest media, very dishonest press.
Joining us now is Susan Faricio, chief congressional correspondent for the Washington Examiner. So what do you make of the contrast between the Obama send-off, all those specials on TV and front page series, the New York Times writing about what books he likes, and the Trump transition, in which I would say he received no honeymoon?
None. Well, you just laid it out right there. Two completely different approaches by the media toward these two distinctly different people. I mean, they're both different. The way they handle the media, the way they handle themselves in public, and the media's responded accordingly. And Barack Obama, wasn't always friendly to the press, particularly when it came to investigations, leak investigations, eavesdropping, getting reporters' emails. They were spying on reporters. James Rosen here at Fox News. That's what's interesting about this. I mean, Rosen called the Obama administration the greatest threat to press freedom in a generation because they were so lacking in transparency and so, the way they cracked down on whistleblowers. They wanted to really keep FOIA requests from going through. Yet the press was still quite easy on him as a president, despite the fact that, he did have this reputation that was not talked about much and he was not pressed on it much. Yet they still had sort of a friendlier relationship with him, especially if you compare it to Trump. Sean Spicer was on the program last week talking about whether or not the plan that seemed very active to move the reporters out of the White House press room to some larger quarters, which would be across the street or across the campus or whatever. Trump addressed that and kind of settled it in that Fox and Friends interview. Let's watch.
Press briefing room, are you going to move it?
So we said we're going to move it to a larger room in a nearby area, but, not the same area. And the press went crazy, so I said, let's not move it. But some people in the press will not be able to get in. So did the media kind of win that skirmish because the press went crazy and Trump decided that it's not worth the battle? I don't think the outcome is clear yet. They could possibly move people. I think the Trump administration, as Kellyanne Conway said this morning, wants to change the terms of the relationship between the press and the president. And that makes sense because clearly there's a war going on, clearly, between the press and Trump. Trump said it yesterday in front of CIA headquarters. We can argue all day who started it, whose fault it is, but I don't know anyone right now who can say honestly that the press is going to fairly cover this president, because it seems to me they've already set themselves up as sort of the enemy of Trump. And I read their Twitter feeds, I watch their coverage, I saw the inaugural coverage. It just doesn't seem fair to me, and I think that's why Trump is trying to redefine things and trying to level the playing field. You do get a different level of snarkiness and maybe true feelings on the Twitter accounts of some of these reporters. Now, let's talk for a moment about the impact of partisan viewing habits. Pew Research did a poll. Fox was cited as the main source of election news by the most people. But when you break it down, Trump voters, 40% said Fox was their main source, CNN 8%, Facebook 7%, NBC 6%. Hillary Clinton voters, CNN 18%, MSNBC 9%, Facebook 8%, local TV 8%. So Hillary Clinton voters were more diverse in their viewing habits, but a lot of Trump voters watch Fox. Country's divided, and so they're dividing their viewing habits. I think yet the inaugural coverage ratings bear out the same evidence that a lot of people were watching Fox News for the coverage because if, as Trump supporters, you turn on CNN or MSNBC, and they're talking about a dark speech, and then over on Fox News, they feel the coverage is more fair. So clearly there is a divide in the country in their viewing habits. People watch the coverage on Fox News, even in the broadcast networks, and more than twice as much as CNN and MSNBC combined. So that is telling as well. Susan Faricio, great to see you. Coming up, Bret Baier on anchoring the inauguration and the new president's declaration of war against the press. That's next. Joining us now with his perspective on the coverage of the inauguration is Bret Baier, special report, Fox's chief political anchor, and author of the new book, 3 Days in January, Dwight Eisenhower's Final Mission. So we've all been tearing up our shows. Half an hour before a special report yesterday, Sean Spicer came to the briefing room, unloaded on the media. President Trump had done that earlier. And now we're all talking about it. Do you think this is what the administration wants?
Listen, I just look at the past during the campaign, and I look at someone who was candidate Donald Trump, who was a master at controlling the narrative and the oxygen that we talk about the topic the next day. I mean, look at every Sunday show, every single one. And the lead and large part of it had to do with that press briefing, crowd size, the thought about the press versus Donald Trump. What was not in there? I mean, there was not a lot of focus on these massive protests in cities around this country and the world, at least as far as the lead of those Sunday shows. Is that all part of it? This happened again and again in the campaign, and people would say, well, they've gone too far this time. But meanwhile, they would get the storyline that they wanted. I think most of this is not by accident. And at the same time, people out there those who were sympathetic to Donald Trump would root for him against us. Yeah, I mean, we're not a sympathetic bunch, the media. I mean, we don't go in great standing.
Understatement of the year,
yeah,
Mr.
and
Bear.
I think that they want to break the China, shake things up, and this is part of their strategy. And it's just an interesting day one.
Does this create problems for the new press secretary, Sean Spicer, in terms of the tone that he took? And now he's got a deal, and he's on the front lines dealing with journalists.
Well, I'm sure it may have changed. That may not have been how he thought he was going to start with his first briefing. And that really wasn't a briefing, it was a statement. But you know, I covered the White House as chief White House correspondent. There is a relationship there, and Sean has a great rapport with a lot of these reporters heading in.
He does. He's been doing this for a long time.
So, you know, does that change that? I don't think so. But if it continues like that all the time, it would change the dynamic.
Right. Probably many of us need to get a thicker skin because we're going to be criticized for the next 4 years, and sometimes it's warranted. So you were down in the mall co-anchoring the inauguration. It's funny how we're talking less now about the speech, which was a pretty remarkable speech, whether you liked it or you didn't like it. Did this inauguration feel to you different from your anchor chair than the others that you have covered or watched, in that protests and even some on the right not liking the speech? I mean, Donald Trump is almost like an independent candidate who's taken on both parties.
Yeah, I mean, I said on Fox News Sunday, this is part of the completion of the takeover of the Republican Party. And it's not a hostile takeover because people went willingly, in part because of the actions of the Obama administration and the action or inaction of Republicans in the past. And this was Donald Trump. This was what they wanted, a souped-up inaugural version of a campaign speech, but that fit what they're looking to do, and that is change Washington at its core. So in that sense, it felt very different. The fact that the speech kind of took on Republicans and Democrats in a very aggressive way. As far as the coverage, you know, it was great to work alongside Martha, and we did let it breathe a lot. And really going in, we had talked about that, letting natural sound tell the story, because the transfer of power, as you know, is one of the most sacred things that we have in America. And to let people hear that natural sound, I think, was important.
Right. Now, so we're talking about Sean Spicer as press secretary. In your book about Ike, he had a very powerful press secretary named Jim Haggerty. He had a good relationship with the reporters. But the President Eisenhower, well, at least on one occasion, thought that Haggerty was a little too open with the press.
Yeah, that was his heart attack in 1955 in office. And there was all this talk, what's happening? And Eisenhower tells Haggerty, be as transparent as possible, put all the health records out you can. And then there's a note about a week later, Dear Jim, transparency going fine. I could do without the daily updates on my bowel movements. You know, Dwight Eisenhower. But, you know, Eisenhower was about openness. He's the first president to put transcripts on the record. Before that,
I didn't know that until I read your book.
Before that, you couldn't quote directly a president. You had to paraphrase a president. You can go to news conferences and ask him questions, but you couldn't quote directly. He puts the transcripts on, then he says, go ahead, record it, tape it for radio and TV, and then he is the president who has the first live television news conference where the Fourth Estate is questioning your American president in front of the people.
It's funny because people remember JFK as holding the televised press conferences, and maybe he was a bit better at it, but Eisenhower was the pioneer.
Yeah, he was. And clearly he was not the best at delivery or phrasing, and reporters wrote that because they were gobbling up what was now on the record, saying this guy is stilted in his delivery.
Right.
But in essence, he's the guy who gets it to that point.
Just to put a punctuation mark on this, I mean, you've interviewed candidate Trump, President-elect Trump, many times. I've interviewed him a few times. There's a line here for journalists to be aggressive and try to hold him accountable, as we would with any president, and versus being seen as almost an opposition party, which is, I think, how they view much of the press.
Yeah, and there is a line to be challenging and challenge facts, and then be cheering for them not to do well or appear like you're on one side. And clearly, the coverage of the campaign, we saw elements of that, and opinion writing on front pages, and very aggressive coverage. So, listen, they have the upper hand right now, the Trump administration, and we'll see where it goes.
Both sides facing a big test. Brett Baer, great to see you. We have another special edition of a special report tonight.
Thanks.
Next on Media Buzz, the first Trump campaign manager is known for being combative with the press, just like the 45th president. I'll tangle with Corey Lewandowski in just a moment. Corey Lewandowski was with Donald Trump from the beginning, serving as his first campaign manager and still an informal advisor with a new Washington consulting business. He joins me now on this inaugural weekend here in D.C. How does it make sense for President Trump, who you know so well, to spend his first full day of office in part declaring a war, his word, on the media, and arguing about crowd size?
Howie, you have to remember, this is very, very important to Mr. Trump, that he has a fair opportunity to outline what his agenda is going to be. And if the media can't report fairly the fact that the bust of Martin Luther King Jr. is still in the Oval Office, what makes us think that for the next 4 years they're going to be fair about anything? So this is a clear marker. Right at the very beginning of this administration, he's going to have the opportunity to push back. We saw that with Sean Spicer yesterday. We're going to see it continue to move forward. If they're not going to be fair, there's going to be a recourse.
Is this a calculated strategy? I'm hearing some political insiders say that he needs a target, an enemy. The campaign is over. He can't beat up on Hillary Clinton. The press, which obviously he's taken a lot of issue with, you did as well, is a very big, fat target, particularly for his supporters.
Well, that's part of it, but it's also, you have to remember, he wants to accomplish a lot of things for the American people. He wants to bring people back to work, repeal and replace Obamacare, renegotiate our trade deals. He's not going to get a fair shot in any of those things with the media if they can't give him a fair shot at the beginning.
But the counter-argument to that, Corey, is that the more time that we collectively spend talking about the pundits that he doesn't like, he goes after CNN and NBC a lot in the New York Times, or the crowd size, or mistakes the press has made, that leaves less airtime, less print inches, less oxygen for what you're saying, trade, Obamacare, the reasons that he was elected. So in a way, could he be said to be stepping on his message?
It's very early. You know, we've been here 8 hours, I think, is how long he's been in the office. 12 hours, whatever it's been. Right? Give him the opportunity. Look, I think the disappointing part is that we saw 60 members of the Democratic Party boycott the inauguration. That is not helpful to bring the country together. You know, what we want to see is a fair and clear opportunity, fair and balanced media, if that's possible, which means, hey, the bust is still there. Where's the recourse on that media outlet? It was perpetuated 3,000 times that bust was removed. Clearly a false narrative. No accountability. Why don't we fire the press person for being false? This is the problem. There's no accountability in the media when they say things other than, oh, mea culpa, we won't do it again next time.
Well, it was a mistake, a bad mistake. The Time magazine reporter apologized. I take your point. Reince Priebus said on Fox News Sunday, and he believes, whether we're talking about crowd size, the bust, or other skirmishes, that the media are obsessed with delegitimizing his presidency. Would you go that far? Do you believe that?
I have to agree with Reince. Here's the problem. From day one, if you remember, June 16th of 2015, Donald Trump came down that famous escalator. The media didn't even think he was going to announce for president. And ever since that day, they have never taken him as a serious candidate up until 5 o'clock when the election early polls came out. And they said, well, the race is over. Donald Trump can't win. He won the greatest electoral victory since Ronald Reagan's re-election campaign in the Electoral College for a Republican.
The media blew the election. They didn't understand what was going on in the country. There is no debate about that. But my question is, do you believe now, we have President Trump for the next 4 years at least, that journalists are deliberately trying to undermine his presidency? I know it's early, but we've had 3 months of a transition. Or do you think there's just sort of a culture clash between the two sides?
Well, the Media Research Center did an analysis right after the election, and what they saw from the American people was 96% of the American people didn't let the media bias impact how they were going to vote, because the media has gone way out of their way. You know, don't forget, it used to be that people get their media from three men at 6 o'clock at night. Those days are over. Now you know where they get their media from? Donald Trump's Twitter account. right, which gives him the opportunity to bypass the mainstream media and go directly to the people. We saw it today. He's tweeted many times, say, on different issues. That's his opportunity to make sure that his message is going to be clear and not filtered through this lens of liberalism, which the mainstream media, unfortunately, has become.
Although some conservative pundits were not, continuing to attack his speech, for example, and did not like him during the campaign. Could there be a truce? Could Donald Trump and the mainstream media forge a working relationship? I mean, he did go to the New York Times. He has given certain interviews. Could you see things cooling down and a little less of the hostility?
I think so. I think what I know about Mr. Trump is that he wants to have a great relationship with the media. I know what the public persona is, I know what the private persona is, and I've seen him in those private meetings with many reporters who have never been very fair or candid with him. Yeah. And when you bring him in close and he has the opportunity to sit down with them, it's a very different thing because he wants to have that good relationship. You saw him as the president-elect go to the New York Times and do a lengthy sit-down interview.
You were a CNN contributor last year. Do you believe the network is largely anti-Trump? There's a whole segment yesterday about how he was not telling the truth about the crowd estimates.
I think what happens in some of the media is they run with a narrative which we know not to be true. And look at that false dossier that was put out. Some of the media, which
many didn't report it until BuzzFeed.
Well, that's exactly right. And BuzzFeed writes a story which was wholly and factually inaccurate. It was never verified. And again, no accountability. You know what happens is, I think when the people turn on the television, they're now looking at it very, very skeptically and saying, is this reporter actually reporting the truth or trying to make the news? There's two very different things. It used to go from reporting the news. Now reporters want to be the news. They want to write books about their time traveling around the Trump campaign. They want to do whatever it may be because it's good for them. That's not what Trump is looking to do.
I've got 20 seconds. When you signed on with Donald Trump early in 2015, at a time when most people didn't think he was serious about running, do you think you would be celebrating his inauguration this weekend?
I'm not so sure about that, but I'm telling you, I'm really, really happy with the way things turned out. I think it's going to be best for our country.
I like the way you handled that. Corey Lewandowski, great to see you here in Washington. Thanks for stopping by. After the break, wall-to-wall coverage on some cable news channels for the women's protests here in Washington, around the country. We'll take a closer look. There was scattered violence and 200 arrests during anti-Trump protests on Friday. And yesterday, CNN and MSNBC offered virtually nonstop coverage of a huge women's march here in the nation's capital and in other major cities across the country. We're back with the panel. So while CNN and MSNBC were wall-to-wall, Fox kind of dipped in and out, perhaps undercovered it. I'd be interested to hear your view on that. CNN headline, women's marches across the U.S. send message to Trump. Was that overplaying what happened? Was there a clear message?
I don't think it was overplaying it yesterday. I mean, yesterday was pretty big. I mean, it was pretty big news. I think you can get into, did they overcover and did Fox under, and they're probably both of those arguments are correct in my view. We should have probably done more.
Molly Hemingway, it's undoubtedly news that so many hundreds of thousands of women turned out, but then you had these celebrities, and of course that's sort of eye candy for the television cameras, and you had Madonna talking about blowing up the White House. She dreamed of doing this. And I didn't see a lot of anchors coming on saying, well, this is a really reprehensible thing to say.
Right. It's not just about how much coverage you give, but also how you are describing what happened. And it is important for people to cover this. It's a really big event, and this happened all across the country. But CNN reported it as rejecting hate and divisiveness for hope, love, and unity. An actual journalist on air described the marches as being that way. That's inappropriate for a journalist to speak that way. And also, it's ignoring that these were marches that included a variety of messages, including some that were very violent and vulgar. That needs to be covered as well.
Speaking of vulgar, one of the things Madonna did was when she was addressing the crowd, she dropped a couple of F-bombs, and these were heard live on MSNBC and CNN. Not their fault, in my view. CNN apologized to its viewers. At MSNBC, Lawrence O'Donnell tweeted, "Why should the networks protect the public against words we all use?" So a little more tolerant attitude toward the F thing.
Well, I don't know why he would say that. I mean, we are supposed to bleep those words out. Look, I think
it's hard when you don't have a script and it's live coverage.
When it's live, right, yeah. That's right. Look, I think what happened yesterday was kind of unusual. It was the day after inauguration, so it did deserve a lot of coverage, and it exceeded expectations of what the numbers were supposed to be. But then we get into this fight about crowd size. I do think a lot of the coverage was quite gauzy, where, why were these marches happening? They were just protesting the inauguration of a president, but where's all this energy going to go? Where was it before? What's the end goal here?
People have a right to protest. It's nice that people are engaged in the process, but we just had an election, so it was just not entirely clear to me, other than they don't like Donald Trump, what they were protesting. Also, on Friday, there were also some protest rallies, and Alec Baldwin, who, of course, plays the president on Saturday Night Live, spoke. Here's a very brief look at what he said.
disgrace. They are a disgrace to everything you and I believe in.
So when he's ridiculing Trump on SNL, he doesn't like the guy.
No, but look, yesterday was more than just a story here in the United States. I mean, these rallies were happening in London and Berlin, I mean, in Madrid, I mean, across the world. Also, there were a lot of differences in what the speakers were saying. Van Jones was one of the people I saw who said that he hated the fact that with all this love Trump's hate talk, there was so much talk going on at some of these rallies that was hateful towards Trump and his supporters.
I would like to have heard more than that, Van Jones.
Right, but I don't think, I agree it was Ghazi and that some of that didn't get covered.
Van Jones is a liberal CNN commentator. All right, on Friday you had those, some of the people setting cars on fire, smashing windows of the Fox truck and Larry King's car. Here's Griff Jenkins reporting on that. Let's pause for a moment.
Step out of their way. Step out of their way. Step out of, yeah.
Molly, got to be covered, but to what extent? There's always this question of how much play do you give that when you've got an inauguration going on.
Right. It's always fun to cover riots, and the visuals are very exciting. I saw some people expressing on social media, editors saying this should be covered more relative to what was actually happening on President Trump's first day as president. And it seems like we need to keep that perspective. It's still more important what the president is doing, you know, signing nomination forms or whatnot, as opposed to a couple hundred people violently.
Giving a speech and having a parade and all the things we usually celebrate with a new president. Great discussion. Joe Trippi, Molly Hemingway, Aaron McPike. Still to come, one Trump appointee drops out and some final thoughts on this inaugural weekend. Monica Crowley, who gave up her job as a Fox News contributor to join President Trump's National Security Council staff, said this week she will not be taking the job and will pursue other opportunities. Quote, I greatly appreciate being asked to be part of President-elect Trump's team, and I will continue to enthusiastically support him. Crowley may have feared becoming a distraction as she battles allegations of plagiarism. There were reports by Politico and CNN that Crowley either lifted material or didn't properly credit it on her PhD dissertation and on a book which HarperCollins has temporarily pulled until it can be revised. Finally, you know, the television images really captured the story. I was so struck by the graciousness between outgoing President Obama and incoming President Trump and their wives, a vivid reminder of the peaceful transition of power. But this inauguration felt different to me. Not just the protests, not just the Democrats who boycotted, but the vitriol that continued on social media and the partisan divide in the coverage. Some pundits seeing the new president's speech as proudly populist, many others viewing it as frighteningly dark. There will be plenty of time for the political fights and media attacks and Twitter wars. But now, in Washington, Donald Trump has to turn his rhetoric into reality, and the news business has to hold him accountable like any president without sliding into relentlessly unfair negativity and cheap shots. That's it for this inaugural edition of Media Buzz. I'm Howard Kurtz. It's been a long weekend for us. We hope you like our Facebook page. We post a lot of original content there. Email us, mediabuzz@foxnews.com with thoughts and comments on the media. And check out my new segment every Monday night at 9 Eastern on Tucker Carlson's show. It's called News Abuse. Let's just say there is plenty to pick from these days. Talk to you on Twitter @Howard Kurtz. And check it out. We'll see you back here next Sunday. Talk to you then with the latest buzz.